Hello guys, what is happening, and welcome to this live stream. So in this live stream, once again, Michael Burry coming out of the woodwork with another prediction. This one is, again, I think goes with his other prediction and the fact that he's buying this Geo group, which is in prisons and everything like that, which we talked about in the last live stream. So really, it's going to be interesting digging into what he's saying here. Obviously, he is one of the great investment minds that I definitely listen to because he takes that contrarian view like I do myself. And, you know, contrarians in most cases not always going to be right by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a 90%, 10% game. So if you're in that minority group, you stand a better chance. Anyway, guys, please hit that like button. It greatly helps. Please subscribe to the channel if you're interested in this type of stuff. And let's get right into it and see what Burry is saying here. So Big Short investor Michael Burry says the government is backstopping markets and the economy and warns too much fiscal support will end in a disaster. So, you know, he is talking about that, and let's take into account other countries that have provided massive fiscal support. And one country in particular that I want to focus on is England. It's my home country. It's the UK. The UK, you know, is completely falling apart, and, you know, it is my homeland. I speak to my family all the time. We just have friends over from the UK. We've had a conveyor belt of visitors from the UK over the summer here, and we've heard lots of different opinions on what's going on there, and it's really just not good. And, you know, the UK used to have the world's reserve currency, right? And they have just seen that currency decline, and government deficit spending has just gone up and up and up, and everything is falling apart. The UK can't keep it together, much like Canada and many other countries who are just struggling. They are struggling at this point to keep up, and the US is only managing to do so because they have the world's reserve currency at their disposal. If it wasn't for that, they would be in a similar case to the UK. And at the end of the day, it's important to acknowledge here that they will end up in that scenario in my lifetime. Over the next decade, it's very likely that the US will lose reserve currency status, as countries are already and have been for the prior decade been trying to de-dollarize. So anyway, Michael Burry called out the US government for backstopping financial markets and the economy, warning that too much stimulus would ultimately lead to a devastating downturn. With recent spending bills, including the student loan forgiveness now approaching $2 trillion this year, we have the emergence of the fiscal put. The investor of the Big Short fame tweeted on Thursday, suggesting the government is functioning as a put option for investors by limiting their potential losses, which has been the case, you know, for the past 2 decades, pretty much in most Western countries. It's been this fiscal put that has been the government literally backstopping everything. And if you look at like the UK, for example, the government is like as big or even bigger than the private sector in itself. So it's crowding out the private sector now. And, you know, this growing, ever-growing government has just turned into a monster that now is commanding all this power, and it is just going way downhill. But let's not get too off topic there. So, not just for the pandemic anymore, he continued, and will be as good for America's economy as sugar for babies, he added, implying that fiscal support may stave off declines in asset prices and economic growth in the short term, but it inevitably results in a worse crash down the line. Burry was likely motivated to tweet by President Joe Biden's announcement this week that he plans to cancel $10,000 in student debt for federal borrowers making under $125,000 a year, providing relief to millions of people. You know, the thing is with this student loan forgiveness, I just find that insane. For a start off, it's not forgiven. Somebody is paying for that, and it's the taxpayer or it's the government in the form of deficit spending, which equals inflation. That is essentially what's going to happen with this. So, you know, there's always trade-offs, as Thomas Sowell says. So the fact is that this $10,000, it seems like, oh, it's great. Joe Biden, he is, you know, saving people. And he's really not. I mean, when you talk about how much these tuition fees are, they are insane amounts of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I mean, one of the doctors I know well is still paying off their like student loans and everything like that. They went to school in Utah and they're a doctor and they're 50. So, you know, and you know how much money like doctors are making. So it's kind of just mind-boggling the amount of money tuition fees, and think about how much tuition fees have gone up since that person went, because they're 50 right now. So that gives you an idea of just the obscene amounts of money. Like, the education system is just so broken in the United States. I mean, it's broken, let's face it, in most countries, but you know, in the US, it's especially broken. It has just become this huge cash cow. And really, it's actually impacting the economy overall, because if people can't get educated properly, then that presents a problem for future growth. You know, Ray Dalio talks a lot about it in his book, and it's very, very important, because actually this is all part of the change in the world order, because education is a big structure of that. So, you know, and this also means to a lot of people, well, it's like, what is your degree worth? Like, a lot of people who have degrees are just working like in McDonald's or at grocery tills. You know, they're not doing what they originally went. I read a statistic ages ago. I think it was like 60-70% of people that go into college and higher education and study something don't actually end up pursuing it. And, you know, there's so many different things that you can do. It's become oversaturated now to a point that you can do this specialist degree in this certain subject, and then there's no jobs in that certain subject. You know, I know somebody who lives in San Francisco who is like a specialist in, like a real specialist when it comes to diabetes and in diabetes research. And, you know, he has been unemployed for over a decade now. So, and it's just such a specialist job that he has. So it's he had. So it's kind of crazy when you really think about it. So that is mad. So the Scion asset management boss had repeatedly voiced his concerns about excessive monetary and fiscal aid in April. He highlighted the trillions of dollars pumped into the economy during the pandemic in the form of stimulus checks, cash out refinancing offers, forgivable loans, and indirect support. He questioned how consumers could possibly fill the void in their finances left by those programs ending and lending standards tightening, as higher wages wouldn't be enough. Now, this is what I really want to discuss, is because this kind of goes with his play on that Geo group. You know, maybe he's trying to say something through that play, is what I'm thinking. And, you know, what he says there makes sense, because, you know, if people are going to be potentially like running out of money, like he further says in this article, then what does that really mean? What does that mean for civil unrest? What does that mean for crime? Well, sorry, I touched the mic there. Well, it means that it's going to go up. You're going to see civil unrest. You're going to see crime rising. So, you know, I think that is very key to remember. You know, I'm looking at the UK, for example, and the UK is having major issues with crime. You know, crime is rising massively here in Calgary, all over North America, Canada, the United States. But, it's just a point that you can't, this wealth gap that just keeps getting larger and larger. Well, it's dividing people more and more. And I said about, that displaying wealth is almost going to become a sin in the society that we're coming to live in. Whereas you drive like a Ferrari around, people are going to key your car, slash your tires, and everything like that. That's definitely becoming a thing. Like, I saw on the news that in Mayfair in London, which is one of the most expensive places to live in the world, two people on a moped essentially assaulted some guy in a Bugatti Veyron. This is like over £1 million car. And essentially, they were just trying to steal his watch. They weren't even trying to steal the car, but they damaged it because they were bashing it with a hammer. And there's a video out there of that happening. And the thing is, people like that are going to get targeted more and more and more. And, from the people I've seen who are extremely wealthy and they're really smart and switched on, you wouldn't be able to tell that they're wealthy. It's usually the showy show type people that they feel like they got something to prove, who are like that. But, the reality is that I just think that type of thing, that type of crime, where it's specifically targeting people who live in more expensive neighborhoods, more expensive parts of town, people who are driving expensive cars, people who are wearing suits, they look like they've got, those are the type of people that are going to be targeted. And if you think about it, that like let's say you work for a big corporation and your boss, who earns like 5 times your salary or 3 times your salary or whatever, fires you, and then you get real bitter about those people and you end up resorting to crime, and that you're going to kind of think that those people are out to get you to a certain point, and that could easily flip you to targeting those people. And when you think about like the politicians and the central planners, they're guarded by all their security, so they don't care about this sort of situation happening. Now, you're never going to see that sort of thing happening in Dubai though, and that's a reason why it attracts so much wealth as it does. Is just, I have several friends that live in Dubai, and they say that they get one who drives a Bentley, and he says he can just leave the Bentley unlocked and he can go into a store, do shopping. Nobody's going to take it. Like, it is just like totally different world. And there is, don't get me wrong, like there is certain things about living in Dubai and that part of the world that aren't so great. But there are a lot of things that are great, and you got to weigh up which you kind of pull on the most. But I think it's interesting that Burry's talking about this, because the way these Western countries are going, Europe, the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, the United States, they're all going in the same direction, which is that wealth gap keeps getting further and further apart. Crime is going to keep going up. Civil unrest is going to keep going up. I mean, the trucker movement that we saw was a massive, massive movement because people were fed up and they'd had enough. And it's just, you would have never expected it to happen in rosy world of Canada, would have you? And it did happen. So, the thing is, anything is possible. For those people who think, it's never going to happen, think again. Like, it's going to be in the places that are most vocal in those voices. So, and again, with what happened with BLM, that was a huge protest. And again, a lot of people just sick, had enough. Same reasons they got to the streets for that point. They just had enough of the government. They were sick and tired. There was a lot of different opinions and voices that were in that weren't just about the BLM movement. It was just a fact that people have had enough. They're at the end of their tether. They're sick and tired of what is happening. And that has only just got worse and worse since then. So, we're getting to a breaking point, and maybe that is exactly why Burry is sending this sort of message, or this investment he's doing in Geo Group. because he thinks that there's going to be a hell of a lot of people incarcerated because as a result of this, civil unrest is just going to skyrocket. And what he says down here is really alarming in a second. The fund manager has taken aim at the Federal Reserve as well. He claimed the central bank was addicted to stimulus and has accused it of raising rates and shrinking its balance sheet, not to curb inflation, but to ensure it has scope to shore up asset prices and the economy when stocks and consumer spending slump. So basically what he's saying there is they're trying to raise rates just so that they have the firepower to then reduce them back down and, start doing more quantitative easing and everything like that, propping up asset prices. That's basically what he's saying. So, and that could very well be the case. Only time is going to tell with these central banks what their true intentions are. And really, I agree with Burry that I think inflation is going to go down in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to go up. And I think that, again, if you get more of that stimulus, more of that intervention, because more of that cocaine has to enter the system, and then people just get more hooked on that, and that just creates more erratic behavior. The wealth gaps, again, just get larger and larger and larger. And I believe we are really at that breaking point. We got to that breaking point in 2020. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to try it all over again, fail, and then we set the precedence for a new trend. So we'll see what happens there. But this is really alarming. Burry has noted that American households are facing higher food, fuel, and housing costs, leading to them putting away less money each month, tapping their savings, and loading up on debt. Consequently, they're on track to virtually exhaust their savings by Christmas. By Christmas. So let me read that last part again, because that is just nuts. They're on track to virtually exhaust their savings by Christmas. Okay? Just think about what that will do if that happens. So if that is the case, and Burry is extremely smart, I am in no shadow of a doubt that he has been analyzing that number to the death. So it's pretty reliable source that Michael Burry is saying about this here. So that is just insane. And that really goes hand in hand with what we talked about last week, which was his geo group play. Because, if that is the case, you are going to see lots of people taken to the streets. It's happened before. It happened in the 1970s. And you are going to see civil unrest absolutely skyrocketing. And I can already, there could be catalysts on the left and the right side of the political spectrum. It could be uprising of a BLM type movement, or it could be because of an assault weapon ban, which the Democrats are now going on about. So, there is a multitude of things that could happen. But I'll tell you this much. If a civil war type scenario broke out in the US, it would spread. It would spread just like everything else spreads, because there is no stopping social media and all these other things. They try and censor as much as they can, but then they know that they can't do any more. I mean, look how much they're censoring what's happening with the Dutch farmer protests and everything like that. You don't see that on Bloomberg at all, because, I have Bloomberg on in the office. It never comes up, but you see that California could be experiencing blackouts, and yet they are trying to peddle all this green stuff. And that's what that Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of it was all about. Oh, the green agenda and how everything's going to become green, and we're going to get all these electric charging stations, funding for these electric charging stations. You've already got places like California, which have a high amount of people with electric cars. Well, not a high amount, but proportionally compared to the rest of the United States, a high amount. And, they're nearly having blackouts. So you've only got to think logically to really put two and two together here. You do not have to be smart at all. But this is the government. They don't live in the real world. They live in like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory world, where they're just in that place. They're just constantly drinking from the chocolate river. And eventually they're going to fall in there like that kid does. And it's going to be game over for them. So the reality is you can't kick the can down the road forever. And a lot of people have positioned themselves in a way that they think that the can is going to be kicked down the road forever. And that's just never going to happen. And I think those people are going to be very, very, very disappointed and distraught when they lose 90% of their wealth. Because the reality is, guys, stuff is going to get really fast over this next decade. Like, there is so many things going on that honestly, like, the probability of something catastrophic happening, like a civil war or something of that magnitude, is just the probability just keeps rising and rising and rising. So, and I don't hope that happens by any stretch of the imagination, but I think people positioning themselves based on the past prior 10, 20, 30 years, thinking that's going to continue forever, are naive. They're delusional. They're not looking at the forward indicators. They're just looking in the past. It's like I've said before, if you're driving in the rearview mirror, if you're driving by looking in the rearview mirror, you're probably going to crash. So it's not a good thing to do. And that's why I put out that video on interest rates. And, if you haven't seen it, go watch it, because I think it's a good video to watch just to see trends of the past and different pressures that could cause inflation to stay high. And there's not really many pressures apart from a depression being allowed to happen that could cause prices to come back down. And ultimately, there will be a depression. But whether the government tries, the government's always going to come in and try and save the day. They're just one day, and I think that day is coming very soon. They're not going to be able to save it. And you can see that happening in England. And, I just want to take you to this chart real quick, just to show you like this really long chart, which you'll find interesting. And it's of the pound to the dollar. And I think it's interesting because you look at this chart and what do you see? You see that from the 1800s, the pound to dollar was stable until the 1900s. And then basically after the Second World War, when the pound lost reserve currency status, it was stable for a while. And then just the deficit spending began and everything just went downhill. The debasement of the pound and everything like that just meant that it is essentially just going down and down and down in value. And this is just versus the dollar. This isn't versus what you can actually buy with that pound. And that spike there, by the way, just after the 1850s is because of the American Civil War. So the dollar value plummeted during the Civil War, obviously, because it looked like America might be, completely bifurcated at that point. But anyways, what I'm trying to illustrate is essentially this is where the US will eventually end up. But for now, that dollar is likely to continue rising in value and strengthening against all the other currencies, and it will be the last one to go. So one by one, currencies are gonna go. They're gonna lose. And look at the Japanese yen. Look at the pound. They have lost 20% of their value in just this past year against the United States dollar. So think about what that does to inflation, and look at what's happening in Japan and England. They can barely raise rates there. They've got the CPI in England is running at over 10%. In Japan, it's still at decade highs in Japan, even though it's much, much lower. I think around 2.5%, 3%, if memory serves me. So think about that. Like 10% inflation in England. That is the government defaulting. It's the government defaulting. It's not like an official default, but it is a default. They're defaulting through inflation. And, you know, it really remains to be seen which countries are going to actually make tough decisions and which countries are just going to deficit spend, print money, debase their currency, just let everything get out of control. Let the health service crumble, let civil unrest absolutely skyrocket, crime skyrockets. That is all upcoming. And I got so many videos that are coming about what is going on. Like, that's why I'm here doing this on Wednesday. Normally I'd be releasing a video, but I've got about 12 live streams that I need to do. I just got backed up because I've been so busy, you know, with people coming over, and now I'm trying to get caught up. So we got a ton of stuff to get through. So I'll be back here on Friday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time. So that'll be 7 p.m. Eastern Time and 4 p.m. Pacific Time. So I will see you then. So thanks for being on this live stream. If you enjoyed it, hit the like button, subscribe. I don't know. Does it make any difference? You let me know. Let me know what you think of this chaos in the comment section below. I love to hear from you guys. I read all your comments and reply, as you guys know. So I will see you in the next